Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Paikin, co-host of the onpoli podcast on TVO.
I'm John Michael McGrath, co-host of the onpoli podcast.
I'm Jessica Smith-Cross, editor-in-chief of the Trillium.
And I'm Charlie Pinkerton, a reporter of the Trillium.
Tonight on the pod, there's an update on the Greenbelt scandal, and you've got to know the opposition leaders are licking their chops with giddiness.
Doug Ford has received endorsements aplenty during the campaign, but mayoral endorsements are a new trend.
And we investigate why Ontario Progressive Conservative candidates are skipping out on local debates.
The answer may surprise you, or come as no surprise at all.
In your column, my column, I'll focus on some ideas for Trump-proofing Canada and what they could mean for the provinces.
And I've got a piece up on a political reunion of sorts where former implacable foes seem to be getting on quite nicely.
It's Friday, February 7th, 2025.
So let's get to it.
Well, hello, everybody. You know, our little tradition here is we start JMM and I give each other a little sugar. So why don't we do that as well?
Here we go.
Come on, Shari. Everybody gets some sugar here. We should just explain what's happening because clearly things look a little different here at our table this week. Jesse and Charlie are with one of the fine digital publications that cover Queen's Park. It's called the Trillium. They do a podcast called Trillium Talk, and we thought it would be fun to get their podcast and our podcast together and talk about how this 44th general election is going.
Yeah, it's kind of like a crossover episode of two TV shows. Universes are colliding. I'm Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote. Which one of you is Magnum PI?
I'm going to say you.
No, well, I'm the oldest, so maybe. But on the other hand, he's got the mustache. And so Tom Selleck had the best mustache going, so maybe it's him.
Does anybody wear those shorts?
Not I. No,
Okay.
definitely not. Now, Jesse and Charlie, we usually start by talking about whatever dumb shirts that we're wearing on this podcast, and I am thrilled that I don't have to wear a suit and tie for this part. They let me wear some stuff, and I go into the attic and I find some old T-shirts that have some relevance. So I'm going to start by saying, Sheldon, you want to get a shot of the front of the shirt here? Can we see that on? There we go. Okay. So you guys you do recognize who this is?
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm required by law to know.
Okay, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And don't we have a drinking game here where every time I say Bill Davis's name, you have to take a drink?
Yes,
Isn't
well,
how it
that and
goes?
Hamilton. So.
Yeah, let's go. Okay, so now here's the background behind this shirt, just so you know. Can we bring this picture up? Let's bring this picture up. One day I saw my son Henry wearing this shirt that simply said Miles, and that, of course, is one of his favorite musicians, Miles Davis. And when I saw that, I thought, wait a second, I know a Davis who's more impactful to my life anyway than Miles Davis. So I got a shirt with Bill just made up of it. So that's that. Now, the question is, why am I wearing it now? What is the relevance to my wearing a shirt with Bill Davis's picture on it now?
That's not just your Friday shirt?
It's not just my Friday shirt. There actually is some method to my madness. Anybody?
I don't share your brain, Steve. I don't have Bill Davis's entire career and life just locked in there.
I'm really shocked, and I'm going to be working on you because we need to make that happen. The last time we had a winter election in the province of Ontario was 44 years ago, and this guy was the premier. He's the last guy who called a winter election in Ontario, so that's why I'm wearing Bill on my front. Does that make sense?
All right.
Is
Absolutely.
that useful? Is that relevant? Is it none of the above?
I
Some of
checked
the
and
above.
Some of the above. Good.
The legislature was dissolved, I think, like a few days before I was born for that election.
Oh, my Lord. I keep forgetting I'm surrounded by children on this podcast. Anyway, without further ado, let's get to issue one. A former staffer in Doug Ford's government at the heart of the Greenbelt scandal is being sued by a developer who alleges that the staffer said he'd use his influence to get back-channel rezoning orders. But it's the latest development in this story that has dogged Ford, and the other parties are seizing on it. Jesse, what else do we need to know here?
Well, that's right. Two former Ford government staffers are being sued. One of them was the chief of staff to the housing minister during the time of the Greenbelt scandal, which is, of course, still under our CMP investigation today. The other staffer has worked in the Premier's office, but isn't associated with anything having to do with the Greenbelt. So there's a statement of claim in this lawsuit with all kinds of inflammatory language, high-handed conspiracy, fraud. But the basic allegation is that these two political guys did agree to use their influence to get this land rezoned and that they didn't follow through with it, hence the sort of conspiracy allegation. The plaintiffs say it was all like a ruse to get their money. So they claim they paid $1.5 million and like through a construction company, which was to pay these political guys quietly because of their, sensitive political connections. Those are the allegations that have been put into the statement of claim filed with the court.
Important point here. Do we know whether any of these allegations are true?
So that's a very important thing to note here.
Yes.
None of these allegations have been proven. We've just seen the statement of claim filed, so they have not been proven in court. Both of the former staffers have denied them through their lawyer. When we asked about this, we got identical statements saying that many of the claims against them are baseless, that they intend to defend themselves in court, and that they only acted with a high degree of integrity. And one other thing I'll point out is that this is a very, very strange lawsuit due to the fact that these are developers or would-be developers suing those they hired, essentially admitting that they had contracted them to do, basically business that one wouldn't really want to admit to
Kind of
typically.
shady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Given that part of the reason for the premier calling an early election, I think we've all sort of surmised that one of the reasons was a desire to get ahead of any potential announcement from the RCMP about that Greenbelt investigation. I think it's fair to say that Doug Ford would rather not have had a reminder this week about all of this during the campaign. But while we were talking about stories broken by the fine reporters at the Trillium, who wants to quickly tell me about the accuracy of the numbers on the side of Bonnie Crombie's campaign bus?
I'd be happy to tell you about this. It was actually our reporter, Snay Dougal, who did this. So the Liberals' campaign bus has on one side of it 11,000 people died waiting for surgery last year. But our reporter, Snay, has a habit of using the Freedom of Information system to get data on healthcare, on surgery waits, and stuff like that from Ontario Health. And she had done an FOI request.
Freedom of information.
Freedom of Information request for the numbers of Ontarians who died on surgery waitlists after hearing that number get tossed around. So what Ontario Health told her was that, and gave her in documents, was like it's 1,600, not 11,000 people. And a lot of the people who died on these wait lists are waiting for like cataract surgery and knee surgery, stuff that you can't reasonably say would contribute to their death. A doctor who she talked to was like, cataracts don't explode. They didn't die from this. So it's a bit misleading. She did some more digging. It turns out the Liberals got this number from a union who had been using it. And they had got it from a group who had sort of based it on people waiting for not just surgeries, but also diagnostic scans. So for any reason that you're waiting for an MRI or anything like that, and you happen to die, you would be captured on this. How many people do die because of, waiting for surgeries and stuff like that? There just isn't a figure that is
But it's not
reliable.
11,000.
No, it's not going to be
It's not
11,000.
11,000.
No.
But the Liberals are defending themselves on this by saying that number has been, quote unquote, out there, and they were just using a number that was out there. Now, that's accurate. That number has been out there, and it's been referenced many times. But nobody ever checked, I guess, to see whether it was accurate.
Until Snake came along.
Until Snake came along. Well done, Snake. Anything else on this?
All
No.
good.
I think we're good.
We're off to issue 2. We've got a listener email to lead off this one. JMM, you want to take us through it?
Absolutely. So this is from Krista Strauss from New Hamburg, Ontario, who writes, I have noticed a few mayors endorsing the Ford government and their local MPP. Is this something new or a past practice that I'm just not aware of? I thought municipalities are supposed to remain nonpartisan. I would love your thoughts on this. Big fan of the show. Keep it up. Thanks, Krista Strauss.
That is a very sharp observation, Krista, because, and let's put this on the record here, 3 Niagara region mayors publicly endorsed Doug Ford at a campaign event. Then Mark Sutcliffe, who is the mayor of Ottawa, did an event with the premier, who was promising to upload all the costs of the LRT to the province. And then Kevin Ash, the mayor of Pickering, Dan Carter, the mayor of Oshawa, did an event with Ford, and they were pretty complimentary to the premier's record. I've been watching Queen's Park a long time, and I cannot ever recall during a writ period so many mayors coming forward and endorsing anyone. But they've done it for Doug Ford here. What's going on?
Yeah, I was at that Niagara event when they came out, and I remember my first thought was, oh, I guess these mayors can read the polls. And maybe they see a substantial Conservative majority coming. Look, I think mayors depend a lot on funding applications to the province to get things done in their city. That's just the way it works. And I think I've always thought that's why they don't usually do endorsements like this, because you wouldn't want to back the wrong horse or even be seen to be backing the wrong horse. Like, even if that doesn't affect whether you'd get your funding or not, maybe your citizens would feel that way. But I guess that's not the case here with the PCs polling so high. Maybe they feel very comfortable in coming out and doing this now.
As you know, everything comes back to Bill Davis when I sit at this table. I remember during the 1981 election campaign, the last time we had a winter campaign in this province, apparently it wasn't mayors, it was hospitals. There was a hospital that wanted to do an event, and they wanted the leader of the Liberal Party, who at the time was Stuart Smith, and Eleanor Kaplan, who was running in North Toronto riding. They wanted to do an event at the hospital to reflect some issue around Liberal health care policy. And somebody from the Progressive Conservative campaign called up the hospital and said, if you ever want another dime out of us again, you're going to cancel this. And they did. So, I'm not saying that's what's going on here, but it's not beyond the pale to think that somebody in Progressive Conservative headquarters called up all these mayors and said, you're having a good relationship with us, right? How'd you like to? And if you don't, maybe I'm just speculating. That's okay to speculate, isn't it?
Yeah, I would note that some of the private sector unions that have endorsed the PCs as well have also gotten a lot of money for them for their priorities. And the first event in London, there was a bunch of guys with the Electrical Brotherhood, I think it was. Yeah. I talked to one of them. I was like, hey, why are you here today? What do you think? He's like, oh, they gave us these many millions of dollars for this training center, and we love it, which is, you're in the government, you give them millions of dollars. This
Charlie, many years before you were born, Charlie, there was something called Watergate. And there were two reporters.
I have heard of that.
Two reporters called Woodward and Bernstein. And what did Deep Throat say to them? Follow the money. Follow the money. It almost always comes back to the money.
I mean, Krista asks about, aren't municipalities supposed to stay nonpartisan? And I think the dividing line here is that, the formal, like the municipal civil service is supposed to not be dragooned into partisan activity. You wouldn't want to see taxpayer dollars from a municipality being spent on partisan advertising. God, many years ago, there was a northern mayor who got into hot water because he made a donation to the Progressive Conservative Party with his municipal credit card. And obvious no, and he quickly fixed it when somebody pointed it out to him. But I think he might have literally just had the wrong credit card in hand when he was punching numbers in. But, yes, in that sense, municipalities are supposed to be nonpartisan. But at the same time, mayors are just citizens as well, and they are allowed to make these endorsements. It's not like they're committing any kind of political resources or municipal resources.
Well,
there is the issue of Patrick Brown.
There is the issue of what's going on in Peel Region right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I should add, too, that I think in the last, not just general election campaigns, but by-elections as well, that PC candidates, more so than other parties, have seemed to be municipal politician types. Mm-hmm. So, speculating as well, some of these folks might have their own future career aspirations in mind.
And we should say, just to close, what's the expression? Close the loop on that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The allegation that Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, is making is that Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton, and the two of them have a quite terrible relationship, which is based partially on issues and policy and partially because they just don't like each other. The allegation is that Patrick Brown's mother-in-law is running against Bonnie Crombie in Mississauga, East Cooksville, and that, as the allegation goes, the mayor is using municipal resources to help his mother-in-law in that campaign against Crombie. That is the allegation. I don't know that there's any evidence that's been adduced to confirm that, but that's the suggestion. So that's what my smart aleck comment was about before.
And to round it out, on the day before, right before the writ, the then Premier Doug Ford was at Brampton City Hall, and that's the day he said, yes, I'm going to call the election, and it's coming. It was full of people, and there have been allegations that it was city staff who were told to be in the building that day.
Exactly. certain encampments angle here you want to get into?
Right, and this is just one of those other issues where you mentioned municipal politicians wanting to stay on the province's good side and how that can pay dividends. But the government had introduced that anti-encampments bill right before the winter break. Many mayors across the province had been asking for measures like that. Doug Ford said he would even invoke the notwithstanding clause if courts shot down that legislation. So maybe that is the kind of issue I think that might make mayors more responsive, more interested in endorsing the government, because that was such a big priority for mayors around the province last year.
You mentioned the word responsive, and I want to pick up on that because, and this is really, really strange, a lot of mayors have, I'm sure probably told all of us, there has been no more responsive premier to their needs in their careers than Doug Ford. And I have heard that from two mayors you would not expect to hear it from. Stephen Del Duca and Andrea Horvath, both of whom Ford beat in the last provincial election. Yes. And they sing his praises in terms of his accessibility. They pick up the phone, they call him, they leave a message, he gets back to them in an hour. So maybe that's part of the endorsement story as well. You never know. Mm-hmm. Okay, and with that, we're off to issue 3. The party leaders will gather in North Bay, Ontario on Valentine's Day, but I suspect they are not going to share any loving thoughts with one another. No, instead there will be a debate about issues of particular interest in Northern Ontario, and we're expecting the general interest leaders debate obviously at some point after that and before the end of the writ period. The parties and the media consortium have been negotiating the details of that, and I suspect we're going to hear something as early as Monday.
Meanwhile, most ridings in the province try to organize their own all-candidates debates, but we have learned that progressive Conservative campaign teams have told their candidates not to participate in any of these local debates, that they should use their time to go door-knocking instead. Jess, what do we think is going on here?
I can see the logic of giving that instruction to candidates. I've been to all candidates debates where there's like a couple of dozen people in the audience, and it seems like a lot of them came with the candidate that they're supporting, and you've got to think, who am I actually winning over with this exercise? And then there's also the chance that you say something that becomes the next bozo eruption and you are in the headlines. So
what's a bozo eruption?
I think it's when you tell the truth or what you really think, and it gets you in a lot of hot water.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there not an expectation that at least once during the writ period, the candidates in riding leftover shoe are going to get together on one occasion and have a all candidates debate?
I think there used to be.
Yeah, there we go.
And, if you're the PCs and you're doing as well, at least as far as the polls indicate right now, and, what they're doing isn't exactly a new strategy. In the last election, I think very little, if any, of their local candidates attended debates. But do you want, as the party, to have your candidates go out there, all the other parties' candidates, essentially attacking them or targeting them in these debates? It's sort of very high risk and, little reward when you are so high in the standings.
I'll tell you though, Charlie, and admittedly, this is a very old-fashioned view, but there used to be a time in the province of Ontario when you would have been embarrassed not to show up at a debate, because it's just something that was expected. It's something you did. It was part of the democratic process. But there appears to be no sanction or consequences for skipping or missing them now. So a lot of candidates just don't do them.
We're seeing a lot of response to our story on that from people who are outraged. And even if they maybe wouldn't have gone to their local all candidates debate, I think they expect that people do that. It's like, okay, this is a thing you have to do. You have to be able to go on stage and articulate your position. If you can't, there's something wrong. Not enough people seem outraged, obviously, about it because the PCs are obviously winning very highly in the polls right now.
No, and I remember, more than a year ago, the by-election in Kitchener Centre. Charlie and I were actually there on the same day. I think we went door-knocking with some of the same candidates. And I do remember, one of the live issues in that by-election was that the Tory candidate had not gone to the all candidates debate, and you could see it come up at the doors. People were irritated by it. In the event, that was the by-election that Green candidate Ashland Clancy won, so it clearly not going to the debate did not help the Tory in that context. We are also going to be keeping an eye on Kitchener Centre this time around because Ashland Clancy is up for re-election. But I suspect, the NDP held it before her. They would love to get it back. But I think that's going to be one of those ridings where it could be very competitive.
They're trying for only the second time ever, right, to win a seat in a general election.
Yeah.
Mike Schreiner's done it in Guelph, but they've never, in a general election, the Greens have never won another seat anywhere else.
Yes, and we joked when Clancy won that it was like, oh wow, they've doubled the size of their caucus overnight. But they want to hang on to those seats, and in the last general election, they also put a lot of effort into trying to win in Parry Sound, Muskoka with Matt Richter. They are again trying very hard to win there. So it's not just those two seats. They are trying elsewhere, but we will of course have to see.
Got it. Anything else on this?
I'm good.
In which case, we're off to your column, my column. Time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I, and our friends from Trillium, I hope as well, are going to reminisce about the columns that we wrote for our respective organizations over the past week. JMM, what do you got for us?
Sure. So I wrote something about the measures that we're seeing discussed about how to Trump-proof the Canadian economy. The threat of tariffs seems to have receded somewhat, and it's changing the election dynamic in some interesting ways. But, when this kind of thing comes up, people talk about the same basic basket of measures, right? Reducing interprovincial trade barriers, which I think we're going to talk about in the mailbag, getting more infrastructure built to move goods across Canada as opposed to just south of the border. In this context, we're also talking about increasing military spending to meet Canada's NATO commitments. And the point I make in my piece is basically that these notions may all have their own merits, but one thing they absolutely all have in common is that if we do them, we will be reducing the power and significance of the provinces to benefit national priorities and probably the federal government. And, that's not a crazy idea. You could argue that was actually the whole point of 1867 and the Constitution. But I think it's important for people to be sort of clear-eyed about the bargain that is being put before voters.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Is this a column that goes deeply, nerdily in the McGrath weeds?
Not as much as you might think.
Oh, okay.
I had enough territory to cover that I could not drill down on too many topics, but I think I do cite some parts of the Constitution.
Shock. I'm shocked. Okay, terrific.
What about you, Steve?
You will be shocked to know that I wanted to write about something that goes back, about more than 60 years. Okay, here we go. Here's the setup. Darcy McHugh was a cabinet minister in 1963 for the first time in the province of Ontario. And the guy who put him in cabinet was the premier of the day, a guy named John Robarts. And to sort of show his thanks to the guy who was not only his boss, but who became the godfather to one of his kids, Darcy McHugh created something called the annual John P. Robarts Luncheon. And he used to invite only conservative, cigar-smoking, port-drinking men to this lunch. And then Mr. Robarts died in 1982, and it became the memorial luncheon to remember Mr. Robarts. And everybody would go to this lunch, and they'd get up, and they'd tell stories about, wasn't John great, and so on and so forth. I did a documentary for this place on the life of John Robarts, I don't know how many years ago, let's say 25. And since then, Mr. McHugh invited me to come to the lunch. He said, you've demonstrated some understanding of Mr. Robarts' life, so we're going to let you come as well. So I was the only kind of nonpartisan, yes, I'm male, but not cigar-smoking, not port-drinking guy who was allowed to come. Anyway, fast forward. A year and a bit ago, Darcy McHugh died after doing this lunch for 50 years. And I thought to myself, this lunch was so great and so much fun, and I loved hearing the stories about the old days. We can't let this lunch die with him. So I asked his kids, Darcy McHugh's two sons, I said, would you mind if I sort of rechristened this lunch the Robarts McHugh Luncheon, name it after your dad as well, and try and keep it going? So I did that last year. We had about 30 people come, and it was really nice. And we did it again last week, but 50 people came this time. And you know what? There were two guys there in their 90s who had worked for the Robarts government. We heard great stories about the old times. I really love it. I hope I can keep it going because it's great to see, as an example, Dave Cook, NDP Minister of Education back in the Ray government days, standing there talking to Mike Harris, progressive conservative premier, not much of whose agenda Dave Cook would have agreed with, and they're standing there having a great conversation about the old days. And we saw this over and over and over. People from different party stripes. I said to the McHugh boys, incidentally, it can't just be only men. It can't just be only Tories. It's all parties now, all genders now. They don't just sit around and talk smack about the opposition parties. We actually just have a look. Anyway, civility is the order of the day, and I think it's a lovely thing, and that's what I wrote about this week. So there we go. Jesse, what do you want to put on the record here? Did you write a column you want to tell us about?
You know, I don't write a column, but I do write stories. You can find them at thetrillium.ca.
Charlie?
Same here. I just put out the facts.
Just the facts, man.
Yeah, at the same place, thetrillium.ca.
Who's that guy? Oh, you're like Sergeant Friday on Dragnet, right? Just the facts.
That's
man.
a reference I do not get, but I will take it.
I got to start getting references from the 21st century here, just so Charlie can help us.
Real pleasure to have both of you on, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And with that, let's go to the mailbag.
If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, we always love hearing from you. Send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, we've got one here from Anna Kennedy from Toronto, who asks, "Hi, Steve and JMM. Great to hear you're going into twice-weekly shows. Can you give us a bit of a basic 101 on interprovincial trade? How did we end up with restrictions on trade between the provinces? What are the benefits and problems with it? Given the U.S. move to apply such punitive tariffs, wouldn't we do well to at least remove the interprovincial trade barriers? What is stopping us? Thanks. Anna Kennedy from Toronto." My first question is Anna Kennedy a pseudonym for John Michael McGrath?
No, I'm not putting sock puppets in the mailbag section. I promise. No.
Well, you know what? This one's all yours, baby.
Okay.
You take it.
So when we talk about interprovincial trade barriers, we are not talking about tariffs specifically, right? Tariffs are clearly unconstitutional. Like if Ontario tries to say a truck coming from Manitoba carrying a box of oranges or whatever has to pay a tariff, that's clearly unconstitutional, and even with the trade barriers we have, courts have struck those kinds of ideas down. When we talk about interprovincial trade, what we are mostly talking about is, or trade barriers rather, what we're talking about is usually like different regulations. So the classic example that you would cite is like a dentist who is licensed to practice one procedure in Ontario may not have their credentials recognized in another province. They can't, therefore, pick up their dental practice and move to another province. That's a restraint on trade. An example like BC might have stricter regulations on the brakes for trucks because cargo trucks have to go through mountain passes in BC, right? But that's a stricter regulation than you would have in Saskatchewan, where there are no mountain passes to go through. And so those differences are what we're talking about when we talk about interprovincial trade barriers. And it's hotly disputed how much of a drag on the Canadian economy this is. I have heard estimates everywhere from 1% of GDP to 5 or sometimes even 10%, depending on who's doing the estimation. There is definitely some cost to it, and as the letter alludes to, we're talking about this a lot more right now because of the threat of tariffs from the United States. And if we can't sell to the Americans, we can certainly at least sell to each other, right? And that's at least the hope.
Unless, yeah. No, well, okay, so there are lots of interprovincial trade barriers in the country. There are supposed to be more of them coming down with the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which was passed a few years ago. But I'm making an assumption here, which I perhaps shouldn't do, but presumably there were good reasons why these barriers were put up in the first place. Is that right?
Well, certainly there are understandable ones. If you think of maybe the clearest example that would be most directly relevant to people at home, like in Ontario, you cannot buy BC wine directly from a website. You have to go through the LCBO. That is a restraint on trade of a sort, right? But if you ask somebody, like, should the LCBO support Ontario-made beer, wine, and spirits, I think a lot of people would say, well, yes, of course we should, right? And then you say, well, okay, but should we prefer Ontario-made products ahead of BC products? Well, okay, things start to get a bit touchier there, right? And of course, alcohol is one of these things that keeps coming up. There was actually a Supreme Court case a few years ago, I believe it was R.V. Como, but it got nicknamed the Free the Beer case because this is one of the few areas where there is actually law about provinces restricting the admission of alcohol across provincial borders. A gentleman was caught bringing in a substantial amount of alcohol from Quebec into New Brunswick. Prices were lower in Quebec, and he, like any red-blooded Canadian would, went into Quebec. I grew up in Ottawa. I know people do this in Hull too, right? You go to Quebec, buy your beer, cross the provincial border. It's technically illegal. He was stopped and ticketed, and he fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, actually, these kinds of interprovincial trade barriers are constitutionally okay. They are not. They don't breach the Constitution.
So Mr. Como broke the law.
Yes, he broke the law. I can't actually remember if the government, if the New Brunswick government actually went all the way to applying the fine after they won at the Supreme Court. But yes, technically he broke the law.
I guess I should say parenthetically, we actually just did a show, I think last week, on the agenda about this very issue. It was, like you, deeply nerdy and in the weeds. But we did do this issue, so if people want to know more about this, they can certainly go on the website, tvo.org/the agenda, and find that show and watch it.
Absolutely.
And that is the onpoli podcast for this February 7th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Be sure to include your first and last name and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks, as always, to our wonderful studio crew for making the set look so good and for helping us with the video podcast. I want to give a special shout out again to Charlie Pinkerton and Jesse from the Trillium. Their Trillium Talk is on daily, I think, during the writ period. Really nice publication from Queen's Park. So thanks to them for joining us for this special occasion. And with that, we say until next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.